Welcome back, and thank you for joining me again as we explore another disturbing, unsolved American mystery. It was the morning of December 23rd, 1974. Fort Worth, Texas was wrapped in a thin veil of winter chill, the streets buzzing with the usual last-minute Christmas shoppers. The scent of pine trees, the distant hum of carols, and the clinking of cash registers filled the air. For most people, it was just another holiday rush before Christmas Eve, but for three young girls, this morning would mark the beginning of one of the darkest mysteries in Texas history. Mary Rachel Trlica, known to everyone as Rachel, was 17 years old, pretty, responsible, and newly married to 21-year-old Thomas Trlica. She still carried a youthful energy that often made her seem younger than her age, but marriage had added a certain maturity to her demeanor. Her friend, 14-year-old Lisa Renee Wilson, was the free-spirited one, always laughing, always on the move, excited about everything life had to offer. Then there was 9-year-old Julie Moseley, the youngest of the three. She was the tag-along that day, the little sister type who adored being included in anything the older girls were doing. The plan was simple. Rachel would drive Lisa and Julie to Seminary South Shopping Center, a popular Fort Worth mall. They would buy a few Christmas gifts, maybe grab some lunch, and return home by mid-afternoon. Rachel's husband, Tommy, wasn't worried. She'd done similar shopping trips before. The trio left around noon in Rachel's Oldsmobile, laughing and talking about Christmas presents and plans for the holidays. None of them could have imagined that they were about to vanish into a void from which no one would ever return. It was just after dark when concern began to grow. The girls hadn't come back, and families on both sides started to call one another, asking if they had heard anything. At first, everyone assumed they had simply lost track of time after all. It was 2 days before Christmas, and the mall would have been packed. But as the hours dragged on, the tone shifted from mild worry to dread. By midnight, their loved ones began calling friends, neighbors, anyone who might have seen them. The parking lot at Seminary South was searched, and that's when the first chilling discovery was made. Rachel's car, her Oldsmobile, sat quietly in the parking lot, locked and untouched. Inside, there were no signs of struggle, no scattered belongings, no purse left behind. It was as if the girls had simply parked, stepped out, and dissolved into the air. Police were notified early the next morning. Detectives began their investigation with little to go on. Witnesses were questioned. Several claimed to have seen the girls inside the mall, laughing, shopping, acting normally. But none could recall anything unusual. No argument, no man following them, no sense of fear. Just 3 girls moving from store to store. Then came the strange letter. A day after their disappearance, a letter arrived at Rachel's home, addressed to her husband, Tommy. The handwriting looked familiar. Rachel's family believed it was hers, but something about it felt wrong. The letter said that the girls had gone to Houston, that they just needed a little time away. It was signed Rachel. The envelope was addressed in pencil, and the postmark showed it had been mailed from somewhere in Fort Worth. But the details didn't make sense. Rachel had no reason to go to Houston. She hadn't packed clothes, hadn't taken money, hadn't even told her husband or friends about such a plan. Tommy found it strange that the letter was addressed to him, but not to any of the other families. When he showed it to the police, some investigators thought it could be genuine. Others believed it was a cruel distraction, written by someone trying to divert attention from what really happened. As the days turned into weeks, search efforts expanded. Police combed through wooded areas, old wells, and nearby lakes. Flyers were posted everywhere. The media covered the case extensively, calling them the Fort Worth Missing Trio. The story gripped the city, haunting families and frightening young women who suddenly feared going out alone. But no trace appeared, no bodies, no witnesses, No credit card activity, nothing. The mall's parking lot became a symbol of emptiness, a place where something terrible had happened, but left no evidence behind. Rachel's husband, Tommy, became a subject of quiet suspicion among some of the townspeople. He had been young, married for less than a year, and now his teenage wife had vanished without explanation. Detectives questioned him repeatedly, but nothing ever pointed directly to him. He maintained his innocence, often appearing desperate for answers. He joined searches, met with investigators, even took lie detector tests, all of which he passed. But the silence of the case made him a permanent victim of rumors. As investigators dug deeper, they began to uncover unsettling threads. One witness reported seeing the girls talking to a man in the parking lot, an older man, possibly in his 20s or 30s, standing beside a pickup truck. Another claimed they had seen the trio getting into a vehicle that didn't belong to them. Yet none of these leads ever turned solid. Every clue seemed to dissolve under scrutiny, like mirages in the Texas heat. One theory emerged early that the girls had been abducted by someone they trusted. It would explain the lack of struggle and the calmness of their behavior inside the mall. Maybe someone had offered them a ride to another store, or claimed to know one of their families. But without cameras or concrete witnesses, it was impossible to say for sure. As 1975 rolled in, hope began to fade. Law enforcement continued to chase tips, but each one ended the same way in disappointment. Psychics offered their visions, claiming to see the girls near water, in barns, or buried in remote fields. Hundreds of volunteers scoured rivers, creeks, and forests, yet nothing surfaced. Families began to fracture under the weight of uncertainty. Rachel's marriage to Tommy eventually dissolved. Lisa's parents, haunted by guilt for allowing her to go that day, withdrew from public attention. Julie's family, especially her mother, never stopped believing that she was still alive somewhere. But years passed, and the silence deepened. Over time, the Fort Worth missing trio became less a police case and more a legend whispered through Texas homes. Teenagers who grew up in Fort Worth were warned not to hitchhike or talk to strangers, their parents invoking the trio's names as a cautionary tale. But beneath the folklore lay something real: 3 families destroyed, 3 girls who vanished without a trace, and a town that never truly healed. In later decades, investigators revisited the case with modern technology, reopening old evidence boxes, examining the mysterious letter again, and re-interviewing aging witnesses. They hoped DNA, new forensics, or long-held secrets might finally bring closure. But the deeper they looked, the more tangled the story became. Some former detectives began to suspect that there had been more to the case than anyone had ever dared to admit: connections, cover-ups, and relationships that had been carefully hidden for decades. Whatever happened that winter afternoon in 1974, one thing was clear: the disappearance of the Fort Worth trio was not random. It carried the stench of planning, familiarity, and betrayal. Somewhere in that mall, or maybe just beyond its parking lot, someone had been waiting. Someone who knew exactly how to make 3 young girls vanish from a crowded shopping center in broad daylight and leave behind nothing but a locked car and a letter that whispered lies. The years would pass, theories would multiply, and witnesses would die with secrets they never revealed. But the question that haunted Fort Worth then still haunts it now: how do 3 girls disappear into nothing, with hundreds of people nearby and no one see a thing? Weeks had turned into months. The decorations from Christmas 1974 were long gone. But for 3 Fort Worth families, time had frozen on that cold December morning. Every night, porch lights stayed on, waiting for girls who would never return home. The walls of their bedrooms remained untouched clothes neatly folded, favorite records stacked beside the turntable, gifts still wrapped under the tree. Detectives continued their search, but momentum was fading. The early energy of the investigation had dissolved into confusion. Each lead that appeared promising unraveled into nothing. Witnesses contradicted each other. Evidence evaporated. It was as if the trio had simply walked through an invisible doorway and vanished into another world. The mysterious letter continued to haunt investigators. Handwriting experts studied it, and though some believed it resembled Rachel's writing, others disagreed. Her friends insisted that the tone felt off. Rachel never used certain phrases that appeared in the note, and the way it was signed, Rachel, was strange. Normally, she signed her letters with Rach, or added a little heart beside her name. This one was cold, almost mechanical. Even stranger was the timing. The postmark indicated the letter had been mailed within Fort Worth, not Houston, on the very same day the girls disappeared. If that was true, whoever sent it could not have been the girls themselves. They would have still been alive and shopping at the mall when the letter was supposedly mailed. It pointed to something deliberate, someone trying to buy time. Investigators quietly began considering the possibility that the letter was meant to mislead them, a classic tactic to delay an immediate search. But by who and why? Rachel's husband, Tommy, insisted again and again that the handwriting looked like hers, but his insistence only made some detectives more suspicious. There were whispers behind closed doors, theories about jealousy, about marital arguments, about hidden relationships. Tommy was young, barely out of his teens, and the sudden disappearance of his wife threw a heavy shadow over him. But when police pressed deeper, their suspicion didn't stick. He passed polygraphs, opened his home, and cooperated fully. No evidence ever tied him to foul play. He seemed as lost and broken as the families of Lisa and Julie. The grief in his eyes, caught in old television interviews, felt real, the kind that doesn't fade with time. As the investigation dragged on, one fact began to disturb everyone involved. Not a single physical clue had ever been found. No clothing, no jewelry, no personal items discarded anywhere. The car was spotless, showing no signs of a struggle or forced entry. If it had been an abduction, it was executed with a surgical precision. Police began to wonder if the girls had willingly left with someone they trusted enough to step into a car without fear. Then came a witness. A teenage boy reported that he had seen the three girls that afternoon in the parking lot talking to a man. He described him as around 25 to 30 years old, with a medium build, standing beside a light-colored pickup truck. The girls didn't look frightened, just chatting casually. But when investigators tried to track the man down, he vanished like a ghost. No name, no trace. Other witnesses remembered similar details, a truck, a man, and three girls, but no one could agree on exactly when or where they saw them. The truck became one of the case's enduring mysteries. For decades, people would claim to have seen it. Sometimes white, sometimes tan, sometimes faded yellow. But it was always a truck, and always with one man inside. Detectives also looked into whether the girls had planned to visit someone after shopping, a friend, a boyfriend, anyone. They dug through letters, phone records, even school notes. Nothing pointed to a plan. Lisa's mother insisted her daughter had been excited for Christmas Eve and would never just run off. Rachel's family said she was deeply in love with her husband and had even left a note reminding him of a Christmas gift she planned to wrap that evening. There was no reason, no motive, for any of them to leave town voluntarily. Yet the lack of evidence left investigators desperate. Without bodies or crime scenes, all they had were theories. One theory that emerged early suggested that the girls might have fallen victim to human trafficking, a terrifying possibility, even in the 1970s. Interstate 35 ran not far from the mall, connecting Fort Worth to Waco, Austin, and eventually the Mexican border. Some believed that whoever took the girls may have transported them quickly out of state or across the border before the search even began. But trafficking in 1974 wasn't the organized crime we think of today. Back then, the term didn't even exist in law enforcement vocabulary. Still, it gave people a chilling explanation that the girls were alive somewhere, trapped, waiting to be found. For years, that fragile hope kept the families breathing. In the late 1970s, a new lead surfaced. A woman called the police, claiming she had seen 3 girls who matched the descriptions in a truck stop somewhere in Oklahoma. She said they looked scared, dirty, and under the control of a man. Detectives followed up, but by the time they arrived, the witness was gone, and no surveillance existed to prove the story. It was another ghost trail, one of many that would follow. As the case aged, Fort Worth's police force changed hands. New detectives inherited the cold file, and with it, decades of frustration. Each new investigator would read the old notes, re-examine the letter, and find themselves staring into the same black hole. In the 1990s, renewed interest came when retired detective Tom Huckabee revisited the case. He believed that key witnesses in the early investigation hadn't been properly interviewed, and that the original detectives may have overlooked connections between the trio and local men who frequented the mall. He suspected that at least one of the girls might have been lured under the pretense of friendship or romance. But with so much time gone, memories had blurred. People had moved, died, or simply forgotten. The case then took a bizarre turn. In 2001, nearly 27 years after the disappearance, a man came forward claiming that he knew where the girls were buried. He said they were buried in a field in Brazoria County, hundreds of miles from Fort Worth. The man had been a young boy at the time of the disappearance and claimed that he'd overheard 2 men bragging about the crime years later. He even provided detailed directions to a supposed burial site. Excavations were carried out. Cameras rolled as police dug deep into the earth. The families waited anxiously, praying for closure. But after days of digging, nothing was found. No bones, no clothing, no evidence. It was another dead end. And yet that dig reignited public interest. Reporters began covering the story again. Documentaries revisited the case, and old witnesses began to come forward with new memories. A pattern started to emerge, whispers about local men who may have known the girls, and about a pickup truck that was often seen near Seminary South during that week. One name that repeatedly surfaced in private conversations was that of a man who had once been close to Rachel's husband. Some said he had a reputation for violence. Others described him as charming but manipulative, the kind of man who could convince anyone to trust him. But despite rumors, the police could never tie him directly to the crime. The deeper investigators looked, the stranger the story became. Rachel's family reported receiving strange phone calls over the years, silent calls, often late at night, where no one would speak on the other end. Once Lisa's mother swore she heard faint breathing before the line disconnected. Police traced a few of the calls, but they were too random, too spread out, coming from different towns and payphones. Some believed the calls were cruel pranks. Others thought it was someone keeping tabs, someone who knew exactly what happened. By the early 2000s, technology finally offered new tools. Detectives revisited the letter again, hoping modern forensics could uncover fingerprints, DNA, or trace evidence. But the paper was too old, too degraded. Nothing viable could be pulled from it. And yet, even as science failed, the emotional gravity of the case only deepened. 3 girls gone in the middle of the day. Hundreds of shoppers, dozens of witnesses, and not one person saw what really happened. There's something deeply unsettling about that, the idea that an abduction could unfold in public, in broad daylight, without panic or screams. It suggests control. It suggests planning. Some believe the trio was tricked into thinking they were helping someone, maybe loading gifts into a car or meeting a family friend. Others think they might have been forced into another vehicle by someone brandishing a weapon discreetly. The scenario that haunts most people, though, is simpler. That the girls got into the truck willingly, laughing, trusting, completely unaware that they were stepping into the final moments of their lives. As years turned to decades, the Fort Worth missing trio became a ghost story wrapped in true crime, a case that law enforcement couldn't close and time couldn't erase. The mall where it all began eventually changed names, rebranded, and remodeled. But locals say that at night, when the wind moves across the empty parking lots, you can almost hear faint echoes of laughter, the ghostly remnants of 3 girls who never came home. They say the air feels heavier near where Rachel's car was found, as if time itself remembers what happened even if people do not. Every cold case holds a kind of darkness. The longer it stays unsolved, the deeper the darkness grows. But in Fort Worth, the shadow of 1974 never left. The Fort Worth missing trio isn't just a mystery anymore. It's a scar, a reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, and that sometimes the most horrifying crimes leave behind nothing at all. By the time the new millennium arrived, most of the original detectives were gone, retired, relocated, or buried under years of unsolved grief. The Fort Worth Police Department still kept the file in a back room, thick with aging paper and photographs that had yellowed at the edges. To most new officers, it was a legend. To the families, it was a wound that never healed. Cold case investigator Tom Huckabee refused to let the story die. He reopened the file in the early 2000s, pouring through hundreds of statements, cross-checking forgotten reports, and mapping timelines. He told reporters, "Somebody in this city knows exactly what happened. They've just been quiet for too long." Huckabee started by re-examining the letter, the same piece of paper that had haunted every investigator before him. He sent it to new forensic labs, hoping advances in chemical analysis might expose fingerprints, trace DNA, or even invisible pressure marks from writing beneath it. Nothing. The paper had been handled by too many people, stored too long. It was sterile now, like the truth itself had been wiped clean. Still, Huckabee noticed something everyone had missed. The letter's envelope was written in a different hand from the note inside. That meant either Rachel didn't write it, or someone else mailed it for her. The postal clerk who processed mail that day was long gone. Every clue seemed to end in a grave. Around that time, a local journalist named Kevin Vaughn took a personal interest in the mystery. He began digging through archives, interviewing anyone still alive who had been connected to the girls. His series of reports brought the case back into public consciousness. Tips flooded in old memories, whispered confessions, and strange coincidences that sounded almost too detailed to ignore. One caller claimed that in 1975, about a year after the disappearance, he'd seen 3 shallow graves on a rural property outside Fort Worth. He'd been a young man, trespassing with friends. They'd stumbled on bones, panicked, and ran. When police went to the spot decades later, the landscape had changed, new roads, new houses, nothing left to dig. Another woman swore she had seen the girls inside a convenience store near the Dallas-Fort Worth airport days after they vanished. She said one of them, possibly Lisa, looked frightened and kept glancing toward a man near the door. But by the time the woman told police her story, it had been over 20 years. Memory, they knew, is a fragile thing. It bends and reshapes itself to fit the stories we tell. Still, Huckabee pressed on. He revisited people connected to the case: Rachel's old friends, her husband Tommy, Lisa's schoolmates, Julie's relatives. Many were tired of talking. Others had begun to believe that the truth would never surface. Yet one detail kept reappearing like a ghost: that light-colored pickup truck. A former mall employee recalled seeing a similar truck circling the parking lot that afternoon. Another remembered hearing a scream near the lot's edge around dusk, but had dismissed it as teenagers fooling around. Huckabee believed that if he could trace the truck, he might unlock everything. Then came an unexpected break, or what looked like one. In 2002, a private investigator hired by one of the families claimed he discovered witnesses who had been too afraid to speak in 1974. According to them, the girls might have planned to meet someone at the mall, a man connected to the car trade, possibly older, someone Rachel vaguely knew. They said he promised to sell them a car for cheap, maybe as a gift for Lisa. If true, that would explain why they left their own car locked and stepped into another vehicle without hesitation. But as the private investigator pushed further, the witnesses backed away. One recanted entirely, saying he'd been misquoted. Another vanished, moving out of state. The story collapsed. The families endured another cruel cycle of hope and disappointment. Each new lead ripped open old pain, only for silence to fall again. Rachel's mother said in one interview, "It's like burying your child over and over, but there's no grave." As the years passed, the case took on a mythic quality. Teenagers in Fort Worth would dare each other to visit the mall parking lot at night, whispering that the ghosts of the girls still wandered there. Local radio hosts spun conspiracy theories, claims of police cover-ups, of organized rings that preyed on young women, even of cult involvement. Most of it was fantasy, but buried in the noise were whispers that felt eerily plausible. One of those whispers came from a retired law enforcement officer who remembered a local man named Rusty, known for cruising the mall in the early 1970s, approaching teenage girls. He had a reputation for charm and manipulation. But by the time detectives looked for him, Rusty had moved out of Texas, leaving nothing but rumor. The deeper journalists and investigators dug, the more unsettling coincidences emerged. A handful of young women had gone missing from Texas between 1973 and 1975, under eerily similar circumstances, abducted near shopping centers or parking lots, cars left locked behind. None of those cases were ever linked to the Fort Worth trio, but the parallels were hard to ignore. Was there a serial predator operating quietly across Texas in the mid-70s, targeting girls who trusted him enough to get close? In 2004, cadaver dogs were brought to search an area near Lake Benbrook, not far from where Rachel and Lisa once lived. The dogs alerted to a specific patch of soil. Excavations followed, painstaking, silent. Again, nothing. No remains, no clothing, not even a piece of jewelry. The land gave back nothing. By this point, the case had stretched across 3 generations of investigators. Some of the current detectives were younger than the missing girls had been. They approached the mystery not as a solvable crime, but as a haunting. One theory that circulated within law enforcement circles suggested that the girls might have been abducted by 2 or more individuals working together. It would explain how 3 victims could be controlled without a struggle, even in daylight. The presence of multiple offenders could also account for the eerie coordination, one driving, another writing the letter to throw police off. But without evidence, theories were just ghosts on paper. Then, nearly 50 years after the disappearance, a chilling pattern emerged through modern database comparison. An amateur sleuth cross-referenced missing person reports with unidentified remains found across the southern United States. He believed one set of remains discovered in Louisiana decades earlier might match Lisa Wilson. The age, height, and dental records seemed close. Hope flickered once again. DNA testing was arranged. Months later, the results returned no match. Another heartbreak. Even so, the renewed attention brought forward new memories. In 2018, a retired truck driver contacted police, saying that in 1975, he'd picked up 3 hitchhikers in northern Texas, 2 teenagers and a younger girl. They told him they were running away from home, headed toward Houston. He left them at a gas station near Waco. He never saw them again. Could it have been them? Maybe. Or maybe his mind, after 40 years, had grafted their faces onto strangers he once met on a lonely road. The brain plays cruel tricks when ghosts live there too long. Through all these years, the surviving families clung to fragments. Julie's older sister, Terry, became the most vocal advocate. She maintained a thick binder filled with newspaper clippings, maps, and every rumor that ever surfaced. She told one reporter, "People think time heals, but time just makes the silence louder." She remembered her last glimpse of Julie, bright eyes, Christmas excitement, a promise to be home before dinner. That memory became both comfort and torture. By the late 2010s, the Seminary South shopping center had changed beyond recognition. New stores, new owners, even new pavement covered the ground where Rachel's car once sat. But those who remembered said that sometimes, especially near dusk, a strange hush fell over the area, as if the air itself paused in remembrance. Locals spoke of flickering lights in the parking lot, of cold spots where none should exist. Whether superstition or something deeper, the legend of the missing trio had become woven into Fort Worth's folklore, an unresolved chord that refused to fade. In 2021, a group of volunteer cold case analysts took another look. Using digital mapping and behavioral profiling, they reconstructed the trio's final known movements second by second. Their conclusion was chilling. Whoever took the girls likely knew their schedule, their habits, and the layout of the mall. This wasn't random. It was calculated. Someone had been watching them. That realization struck the families harder than any theory before. For decades, they'd imagined a sudden crime, a tragic encounter. Now, the idea that their daughters had been hunted, that someone had planned every detail, felt unbearable. Still, the files remain open. The Fort Worth Police Department keeps the case listed as active, though few believe it will ever be solved. Every few years, new detectives inherit the box of evidence, hoping fresh eyes might see what others missed. Each leaves with the same conclusion. The answers are out there, but buried beneath nearly half a century of silence. Perhaps the cruelest part of the Fort Worth missing trio story isn't just the disappearance. It's what it took from everyone left behind. Parents died without closure. Friends grew old, haunted by guilt. Entire generations of Fort Worth children were raised on warnings and fear. The case taught people something dark about safety, that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles, waves, and parks just a few feet away. As one retired detective said quietly in a documentary years later, "We think we live in a world of reasons. But this case doesn't have any. It's just the kind of evil that walks beside you, unseen, until you turn your head and it's gone." He paused, staring at the camera before whispering, "And maybe it never left Fort Worth." As the years rolled into decades, the case of the Fort Worth missing trio became a haunting scar on the town's collective memory, a mystery that refused to fade, no matter how much time passed or how many theories surfaced. The faces of Rachel Trlica, Lisa Renee Wilson, and Julie Moseley remained frozen in time, smiling in those old faded photographs, untouched by the decades that continued to slip away. But behind those smiles was a darkness that still whispered across Fort Worth, a chilling reminder that something terrible happened on that December morning in 1974, something that had never been brought to light. In the years following the disappearance, the family's lives began to fracture under the weight of grief and unanswered questions. Tommy Trlica, Rachel's husband, tried to keep searching, but rumors and suspicion had already crept into his life. Some townspeople whispered that his marriage to Rachel had been strained, that he was too young, that something about him didn't add up. He maintained his innocence, insisting he had no idea what happened to the girls. Still, the letter, that strange, eerie note signed Rachel, continued to hang over him like a curse. The handwriting was disputed by experts. Some said it could be hers. Others said it was impossible. Even the postmark was confusing, written in a way that suggested someone wanted it to appear rushed or disguised. By the late 1970s, the investigation had gone cold. The Fort Worth Police Department, having exhausted every lead, reduced the active search efforts. New detectives rotated in, but they inherited a file full of contradictions tips that led nowhere, suspects that couldn't be tied to any real evidence, and a timeline riddled with gaps. Witnesses' memories had begun to blur. People who once swore they saw the girls that day couldn't remember if it was truly them, or just a memory planted by the endless newspaper coverage. But there were still those who refused to let go. Lisa's mother, Judy, became relentless. She visited psychics, traveled to meet informants, and even chased rumors that the girls had been kidnapped into sex trafficking rings that operated across the South in the 1970s. Others believed the girls had been abducted by a drifter, murdered, and buried somewhere along the endless Texas backroads. Still others whispered that the three had been caught up in something much darker, something orchestrated, deliberate, and meant to silence them forever. In 1975, a man who had been working near Seminary South Mall came forward claiming he saw three girls matching their description being forced into a green van that day. He said two men were with them, one tall, clean-cut, wearing a suit, the other scruffy, with a cigarette dangling from his mouth. The witness claimed he thought it was just a domestic argument, something that didn't seem urgent at the time. But when the news broke of the missing girls, he was sure of what he'd seen. Unfortunately, his account came too late, and the police couldn't verify it. The van was never found. Another man, a trucker passing through Fort Worth, said he'd seen three girls matching the trio's description at a gas station off I-35, about 30 miles south of town. He remembered one of them crying. The station clerk didn't recall anything unusual, and by the time police followed up, there was no trace of them. Years later, strange stories began to surface, reports of a man who bragged in bars about being involved in the disappearance, of supposed sightings as far away as Oklahoma and Louisiana. Every time hope stirred, it died just as quickly. The evidence always crumbled under scrutiny, and the girls remained nothing more than fading faces on yellowed posters. In 1981, the case took a grim turn when a new private investigator unearthed what he claimed were promising leads. He was convinced the girls had been taken by someone they knew, possibly someone within their social circle. He pointed to the mysterious letter, arguing it was a way to delay the search, buying the abductor time. He even suspected that one of the girls may have been coerced into writing it under threat. He pursued this theory for years, but like all others, it eventually went cold. Decades passed. The shopping mall where they vanished changed names and ownership, eventually becoming the Fort Worth Town Center. The area grew, the buildings modernized, and but for many residents it remained haunted ground. People who grew up in Fort Worth knew the story by heart, how 3 young girls went Christmas shopping and never came home. How a letter arrived that confused everything. How no trace, no bones, no belongings were ever found. In the late 1990s, advances in DNA and forensics revived faint hope. Detectives began re-examining old evidence, searching for anything that might have been overlooked, but most of the original material had been lost, damaged, or destroyed. It was as though the case itself was dissolving into history, piece by piece. Then, in 2001, a retired police officer came forward with a disturbing story. He claimed that years earlier, during the early investigation, a man had confessed to him privately that he knew where the girls were buried. The man, now deceased, had led the officer to a rural property just outside of Fort Worth. The officer said they found disturbed ground, but before anything could be done, the man fled. When police later returned, the site had been altered, as if someone had come back to erase the evidence. The location was re-examined decades later, but no remains were ever recovered. In 2018, the Fort Worth Police Department reopened the case once again. Using modern technology, they digitized the old files, re-interviewed witnesses, and even sent some of the surviving letters for forensic testing. A tip came in that same year from a man who claimed he had information about a mass grave connected to the case. Excavations were conducted, but they yielded nothing conclusive. The earth kept its silence. Even with all these efforts, no breakthrough has ever been made. It's as if the Fort Worth trio simply dissolved into the cold December air that morning in 1974. No fingerprints, no credible suspects, no ransom demands, only theories that grew more unsettling with time. Some locals believe the girls may have stumbled upon a crime in progress, perhaps a burglary or drug deal, and were abducted to silence them. Others insist they were victims of a serial predator, maybe someone operating in the area who went unnoticed. There were similar disappearances around Texas during that decade. Women who vanished from malls, parking lots, and quiet neighborhoods. Could it have been the same person? No one knows. And yet, there's always been something chilling about that letter. The way it appeared out of nowhere. The choice of words. I know I'm going to catch it, but we had to get away. It sounded like a goodbye, but not from someone free. More like someone trapped, writing what they were told to write. If the girls were indeed taken by someone they knew, the letter could have been their last cry for help, hidden behind carefully chosen words. Nearly 50 years have now passed since that December day. The families are gone, their lives consumed by the mystery. Lisa's mother died, never knowing what happened to her daughter. Rachel's husband, Tommy, remarried, but always lived under a shadow. Julie's siblings grew old, remembering their little sister as a child forever frozen in time. The case remains open, technically unsolved, a ghost file in the Fort Worth Police Department's archives. From time to time, new tips still come in. Each one is investigated, each one fizzles into nothing. Yet the legend of the Fort Worth missing trio persists, drawing in new generations of amateur sleuths, podcasters, and true crime enthusiasts who comb through old reports and faded maps, trying to find meaning in the silence. Some nights, when the Texas wind howls through the trees, locals say you can still hear faint echoes near the old mall parking lot, whispers of laughter, the sound of teenage girls chattering about Christmas plans. Then the wind dies, and the silence returns, heavy and cold. The Fort Worth missing trio never came home. No remains were found, no answers ever surfaced. And as time stretches endlessly forward, the truth, whatever it was, seems buried somewhere deep in the Texas soil, sealed beneath decades of rumor and fear. 3 girls left their home one winter morning, full of plans and life and laughter. They vanished into the ordinary, and the ordinary swallowed them whole. And perhaps that's the most terrifying part of all. Because in the end, the Fort Worth mystery isn't just about what happened that day. It's about what can happen any day. 3 young girls stepped into a world they thought they knew and never came back. The shadows that took them left no footprints, no sound, no trace. Only silence, only questions, and a story that will never die. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share